If you do this to an empath, they'll quietly disappear. Forever, most people think endings arrive with noise. They imagine slammed doors, angry messages, dramatic speeches, and final warnings. They believe that when someone reaches their limit, they will announce it. They will fight for recognition. They will demand respect. They will make sure everyone knows exactly why they are leaving. But some people leave differently. Some people leave in silence, and when they do, the silence says more than any argument ever could. An empath is often misunderstood. People see kindness and assume weakness. They see patience and assume unlimited tolerance. They see forgiveness and assume there will always be another chance. They see understanding and assume there is no consequence for crossing boundaries. That assumption becomes the beginning of the end. Because what most people never realize is that empaths are constantly observing. They are paying attention when nobody else is. They notice the hesitation before a promise. They notice the change in tone. They notice the inconsistency between words and actions. They notice who only calls when they need something. They notice who listens and who merely waits for their turn to speak. They see more than they reveal. And that is where many people make their greatest mistake. They think the empath doesn't know. The empath knows. They simply choose peace over confrontation, at least for a while. The average person assumes that conflict creates distance. But for an empath, disappointment creates distance. Not a single disappointment, not one mistake, not one bad day. Empaths understand human imperfection better than most people ever will. What creates distance is repetition, repeated disrespect, repeated dishonesty, repeated selfishness, repeated manipulation, repeated moments where someone shows exactly who they are and expects the empath to ignore it. The empath keeps giving chances, not because they are blind, because they are hopeful, and hope is powerful. Hope convinces people that tomorrow will be different. Hope convinces people to stay one more week, one more month, one more year. Hope whispers that people can change. Sometimes they can. Sometimes they don't. And eventually, the empath reaches a moment that nobody else sees. There is no announcement. There is no warning. There is simply a realization that the effort is no longer being matched. A realization that understanding has become one-sided. A realization that kindness has become expected rather than appreciated. A realization that loyalty is being treated like an obligation instead of a gift. And when that realization arrives, something changes. Not on the outside, on the inside. The empath stops trying to convince, stops explaining, stops defending, stops chasing, stops carrying responsibilities that never belonged to them in the first place. What looks like silence from the outside is actually a decision to reclaim energy, a decision to reclaim peace. A decision to stop investing in people who only appear when there is something to gain. This is the part most people never understand. They think the empath suddenly disappeared, but the empath did not disappear suddenly. The empath left gradually, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, disappointment by disappointment. The departure began long before the physical absence. It started the moment they realized they were valued for what they provided, rather than who they were. Human beings reveal themselves through patterns, not promises. Parpos. Anyone can say they care. Anyone can say they respect you. Anyone can say they appreciate you. But patterns tell the truth. Parpos reveal priorities. Parpos reveal intentions. Parpos reveal character. And empaths become experts at reading patterns because they spend so much time understanding people. When those patterns consistently communicate disrespect, the empath begins preparing for an exit that nobody sees coming. Not because they want revenge, not because they want attention, because they finally understand something important. Their energy is valuable. Their time is valuable. Their emotional investment is valuable. And the moment they truly understand that, everything changes. People often mistake kindness for an unlimited resource. It isn't. Kindness requires energy. Compassion requires energy. Patience requires energy. Listening requires energy. Supporting others requires energy. The empath spends years pouring energy into people they care about, but eventually they ask a difficult question. Who pours back? Who shows up when the empath needs support? Who listens when the empath is struggling? Who notices when the strong person becomes tired? Who cares for the caregiver? That question changes everything because many relationships survive only as long as one person continues doing all the emotional work. The moment that work stops, the relationship collapses under the weight of its own imbalance, and suddenly people are shocked. They ask what happened. They say the empath changed. But the truth is simpler. The empath finally stopped abandoning themselves. There is a difference between being loving and being self-sacrificing. There is a difference between helping and rescuing. There is a difference between understanding someone and excusing everything they do. Many empaths spend years learning that lesson. Some spend decades, but once they learn it, they rarely forget it. That is why the quiet departure feels permanent, because it isn't fueled by emotion. It is fueled by clarity. Anger fades, frustration fades, temporary emotions fade, clarity remains. And when someone reaches a decision through clarity, they are far less likely to reverse it. The most dangerous thing you can do to an empath is not hurt them once. It is convince them that hurting them will continue forever. The moment they believe the pattern is permanent, they begin detaching, not dramatically, strategically. Their attention shifts, their focus shifts, their priorities shift, their future shifts. And one day, the person who always answered first responds last. The person who always made time becomes unavailable. The person who always carried the relationship puts the weight down, and suddenly the silence feels enormous. Because people rarely appreciate what they have while they have it. They appreciate it when it is gone. The lesson here is bigger than relationships. It is about value. People teach others how to treat them through what they tolerate repeatedly. The empath eventually learns that boundaries are not walls. They are instructions. They teach people where respect begins. Without boundaries, kindness becomes exploitation. Without boundaries, generosity becomes expectation. Without boundaries, love becomes exhaustion. And exhaustion eventually turns into absence. If there is one thing worth remembering, it is this. The quietest exits are often the most permanent, not because the person stopped caring, because they cared for too long without receiving the same care in return. So if you are fortunate enough to have someone in your life who listens deeply, supports consistently, forgives generously, and believes in your potential even when you doubt yourself, do not take that presence for granted. Appreciate it, respect it, reciprocate it, because the people who give the most chances are often the same people who leave without a final warning. And when they finally walk away, they are not searching for someone to stop them. They are walking toward a life where their peace is no longer negotiable. That is the moment many never see coming. And that is why, when an empath quietly disappears, they rarely come back. The strange thing about human nature is that people often notice effort only after it stops. When the empath is present, their contributions seem invisible. The encouraging messages become expected. The patience becomes expected. The understanding becomes expected. The willingness to forgive becomes expected. What was once appreciated slowly becomes assumed, and assumptions are dangerous. The moment gratitude disappears, entitlement takes its place. Entitlement is subtle at first. It doesn't announce itself. It arrives disguised as comfort. People become so accustomed to receiving support that they stop recognizing the sacrifice behind it. They begin to believe the empath will always be there, always answer, always understand, always forgive, always stay. But nothing in life operates that way. Every relationship functions like an investment account. Deposits and withdrawals, trust and trustworthiness, support and support returned, respect and respect earned. The problem is that many people spend years making withdrawals while convincing themselves they are making deposits. They take time, take energy, take emotional labor, take understanding, take loyalty, and because the empath rarely complains, they assume the account remains full. What they fail to realize is that silence does not mean abundance. Silence often means endurance. The empath isn't speaking because they are weak. They are speaking less because they are measuring, observing, evaluating. They are asking themselves questions that nobody else can hear. Does this relationship bring peace or pressure? Does this person respect me when they gain nothing from it? Do their actions match their words? Am I valued or am I merely useful? These questions become turning points because once someone starts asking better questions, they start getting clearer answers. And clarity has a way of changing everything. Most people believe separation begins with distance, but distance begins with awareness. Awareness that something feels wrong. Awareness that effort is one-sided. Awareness that loyalty is not being matched. Awareness that the relationship survives only because one person refuses to let it fail. That awareness creates emotional gravity. The empath begins pulling inward, not out of bitterness, out of necessity. Because no one can continuously pour from an empty cup. Eventually, the strongest heart becomes exhausted, the strongest mind becomes tired, the most patient soul reaches a limit. And limits are not signs of weakness. They are signs of humanity. One of the greatest misconceptions about empaths is that they are endlessly available. They are not. They simply endure longer than most people. They give longer than most people. They hope longer than most people, which creates an illusion that they have no breaking point. But every person has one. Every person reaches a moment where reality becomes impossible to ignore. A moment where the evidence outweighs the excuses. A moment where promises lose their power because actions have spoken too loudly. And when that moment arrives, something remarkable happens. The empath stops trying to be understood. Think about that. For years they explained, for years they communicated, for years they gave opportunities for growth, for years they offered understanding. Then one day they stop. Not because they gave up on communication, because they finally understand that communication only works when both people care about the truth. You cannot explain respect to someone committed to disrespect. You cannot explain honesty to someone invested in deception. You cannot explain empathy to someone determined to remain self-centered. At some point, words become unnecessary. Partners provide the answer. That realization is powerful because it eliminates confusion. The empath no longer wonders what someone meant. They look at what someone repeatedly does. And repeated behavior tells a story that words can never rewrite. People reveal themselves through consistency, not intensity. Anyone can behave well for a day, a week, a month. Character reveals itself over time. Character survives inconvenience. Character survives pressure. Character survives temptation. And when someone's character repeatedly creates pain, the empath begins making a quiet adjustment. They stop expecting change. That is a critical moment because expectations are emotional investments. The moment expectations disappear, emotional attachment often begins disappearing with them. People think attachment ends first. It doesn't. Expectations end first. The empath stops expecting honesty, stops expecting accountability, stops expecting reciprocity, stops expecting effort. And once expectations vanish, disappointment loses its power. Something else takes its place. Acceptance. Not acceptance of poor treatment, acceptance of reality. Acceptance of who someone truly is. Acceptance that potential and reality are not the same thing. Many people fall in love with potential. The empath often sees potential better than anyone. They see who a person could become, who they might become, who they should become. But eventually they learn a lesson that transforms their life. Potential is not reality. You cannot build a healthy relationship with potential. You cannot trust potential. You cannot rely on potential. You can only rely on behavior. And behavior always tells the truth. This is why some departures appear sudden to everyone except the person leaving. The decision was not made overnight. It was built through hundreds of moments. Tiny moments, ignored messages, broken promises, dismissed feelings, unkept commitments, lack of appreciation, lack of respect. Each moment seems insignificant on its own, but together they formed a pattern. And patterns create conclusions. By the time the empath leaves physically, they have often left emotionally months earlier. Not because they wanted to, because reality demanded it. There comes a point where staying becomes more painful than leaving. a point where loyalty starts feeling like self-betrayal, a point where patience starts feeling like permission, a point where understanding starts feeling like self-neglect. That point changes people. It changes how they think, how they choose, how they spend their energy. Most importantly, it changes what they are willing to tolerate, because once someone learns the cost of abandoning themselves, they become far less willing to do it again. The quiet disappearance is not revenge, it is self-respect. It is the moment someone decides their peace deserves protection, their future deserves protection, their energy deserves protection, their emotional well-being deserves protection. And contrary to what many believe, protecting your peace is not selfish. It is necessary. You cannot continuously save others while drowning yourself. You cannot continuously heal others while ignoring your own wounds. You cannot continuously carry people who refuse to walk. At some point, responsibility must return to the person who owns it. And when that happens, some people become angry, not because the empath was wrong, because the empath was no longer available for exploitation. There is an important distinction between being needed and being valued. Many people confuse the two. Being needed feels important. Being valued feels respected. One depends on what you provide. The other depends on who you are. The empath eventually learns to recognize the difference. And once they do, their standards change forever. They stop chasing relationships built on convenience. They stop investing in one-sided connections. They stop negotiating with people who repeatedly demonstrate indifference. Instead, they begin creating a life that reflects their worth, a life where mutual respect matters, a life where effort flows both directions, a life where peace becomes more attractive than chaos. And perhaps that is the greatest transformation of all. Because the empath who once fought desperately to keep everyone close eventually discovers something unexpected. Not everyone is supposed to stay. Some people enter your life to teach you the value of boundaries. Some teach you the importance of self-respect. Some teach you what happens when kindness lacks protection. And some teach you that walking away is not failure. It is wisdom. The strongest people are not always the ones who hold on the longest. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones who recognize when holding on is destroying them. Sometimes strength looks like release. Sometimes strength looks like silence. Sometimes strength looks like choosing yourself after years of choosing everyone else. And when an empath reaches that stage, the world sees a different person, not colder, not harder, just clearer about what they deserve, clearer about what they will accept, clearer about where they invest their heart. Because once someone learns the difference between being loved and being used, they rarely confuse the two again. And that is why their departure feels permanent. It is not driven by emotion. It is driven by understanding. And understanding creates decisions that are incredibly difficult to reverse.